All right. Can y'all hear me okay? How's my sound?
Good.
Awesome. We're going to get rolling. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to today's webinar, How Can My Community Find Healing Through Food, presented in partnership with our friends at the First Nations Development Institute. My name is Debbie Holloway, and I'm the Community Coordinator here at the James Beard Foundation. I'm so happy to be welcoming you all this afternoon. Since March of 2020, the James Beard Foundation has been hosting industry support webinars and virtual events like this one to help navigate the challenges of COVID-19, provide resources for the hospitality industry, and to better stay connected through difficult times. Before we get going, here's some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. We'll post a link to the recording on openforgood.com after the program wraps. If you have questions for the panelists, please write them in using either the chat box or the private Q&A, and we'll try to address a few questions as time allows. And if you're having technical difficulties, just message us using the Q&A and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot. I will be keeping an eye out and I'll be happy to assist. Today's moderator is Valerie Segrest, an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe and an independent consultant. Valerie recently served as the Native American Agriculture Fund's Regional Director for Native Food and Knowledge Systems. She has a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition and Health Sciences from Bastyr University and a Master of Arts in Environment and Community. Ms. Segrest has dedicated her work in the field of Native American nutrition toward the efforts of the food sovereignty movement, rooted in education, awareness, and overcoming barriers to accessing traditional foods for tribal communities throughout North America. She has co-authored several publications, including the books Feeding the People, Feeding the Spirit, Revitalizing Northwest Coastal Indian Food Culture, and Feeding 7 Generations, a Salish cookbook. Thank you for being our moderator, Valerie. We are also joined by Nick Hernandez, a member of the Ogala Sioux tribe and a citizen of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and founder of the Makoce Agriculture Development, and Meda DeWitt, an Alaska Native healer and public speaker. I will let Valerie, Nick, and Meda introduce themselves more fully, and I will now pass the mic over to Valerie to help guide us through this discussion.
Good day, everybody. It's so nice to be here. My name is Valerie Segrest, and I'm a member of the Muckleshoot tribe, located just south of Seattle, Washington, at the base of Mount Rainier, in between the beautiful Green River and White River. And it is 100 degrees here today, and all of us Washingtonians are trying not to evaporate. So we're working really hard to stay in the cool, dark rooms we can find in our home. And I'm so honored to be here today to talk with Meda and Nick about the wonderful work that they're doing, and to be able to share this space with all of you. Thank you for showing up and for having open minds and curious hearts to hear more about how and hopefully be inspired by how we can help heal people through food. It's one of the reasons why I became so interested in nutrition, because I was working with elders who would tell me that they believe that they could heal themselves if they had better access to their traditional foods and medicines. And so I went to school to be a nutritionist and knew I didn't want to be the kind of nutritionist that sat behind a desk and prescribed a diet to people, my people, who had a hard time accessing the foods that we all know they need to be able to maintain good health. And so I've spent my last over a decade now working in food sovereignty initiatives in my community and helping to support others around me in the Pacific Northwest. And actually you'll find this throughout Indian country. There's just this beautiful network of food system that is socially, economically, and ecologically combined and intertwined. And so we all have these sort of societal fabrics that weave us all together and understand pretty deeply that no community can do it alone, that we're not islands. We really need to be able to be intertwined and help support one another and honor each community's strengths. And so that's what's exciting me today about this conversation, is that we get to hold this space with Meda and Nick and hear about what their communities are doing and be inspired by that work. So I'd like to ask Nick first, if you wouldn't mind doing just a brief introduction and answering our first question, because this hour is going to go by so fast. I think we'll all find that we could talk like this all day. But our first question is to tell us about the food sovereignty initiatives in your community and why you feel drawn to food organizing.
Yes. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Hernandez. I'm a citizen of the Ogala Lakota Oyate on the Pioneer Indian Reservation, what is known as the state of South Dakota, on the southwest part of the state of South Dakota. So, how madak yapi, chonte wash de nape choose up a little, wow, kiemani amachi yapi. And so, I'm a father of two boys, Kai and Ailey. They're 4 and 7 years old and partnered to Liz Welch. We live here on the reservation, and I'm born and raised. And when I graduated college, I guess my initial start to getting into food sovereignty started with that, that inspiration that you get from in the educational setting and stuff. And so when I went to college, I came back inspired, and I was basically inspired by my grandmother, who had a garden right outside of where we live, and she was the inspiration for me to get involved into food, because I grew up in a time when food was grown in communities. We had community gardens, you had family gardens and stuff, and that was kind of the early 80s. And so I always remembered having home cooked meals at the time growing up and everything. And so food is one of those things that brings us to the table, but that also pulls us together. And so I have an organization called Makoce Agriculture Development, and Makoce in Lakota language means this land or homeland. And so I started Makoce in 2019, basically to develop the next step of food thought and community organizing. And so I previously was the director for the Food Sovereignty Initiative for Thunder Valley CBC, and I developed an educational centered program there. But during that time, wanted to take that next level of food systems development and develop Makoce agriculture development here, with the intent of developing food systems. And so food systems and food sovereignty in my community, it starts from family. Your passion is drawn from your family, but also your surroundings, and being able to open up those opportunities that you are basically gifted, in environment, but also gifted in your families. And so my passion, like I said, stems from my family, from both of my grandmas actually, who actually raised me in the gardens. And so I guess that's kind of the brief introduction of who I am in my community. And for my community and my reservation, we're a plains people, and so we lived off the buffalo. And so that's one of our first and foremost initial life ways is that, which is valued for us is the buffalo, the buffalo way of life. And so so those are one of the key understandings in my community and with my people as a Buffalo Nation. But that's kind of answered the question. So I'll pass it off, and then we'll just keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Nick. I love that. I love that, your inspiration starts with your family, and also not seeing that separate from, the land and the gardens that you're your ancestors tended to. That's beautiful. Meda, tag you're it.
Gynnes cheese. Dle ka klenach, Meda DeWitt, Yuchat dosak, Tlingit klenach, Zetzinak, Yuchat dosak, Kat klat, Yuchat dosak, Nanyaina chatzati, Kachari yeri chatzati, Stakin kwan ayachat. My Tlingit names are Zetzinak and Kat klat. My adopted Inupiaq name is Tigiguluk. My adopted Cree name is Boss Eagle Spirit Woman. And I am Tlingit. My family comes from the Wrangell area and Yakutat, which is in Southeast Alaska, which is a coastal rainforest. And I am on Dena'ina lands in Anchorage, Alaska. The picture behind me is of the Atna lands, which is just north for a little ways, which I spend a lot of time in these mountains behind me. So it's another home. Man, what a question. What got me into food? So I like to say my first real visceral memory that I have, I was able to stand. I was very little. My dad was holding a hemlock bough full of herring eggs. And he was well over 6 feet. And Tlinkits, our physical morphology, we actually have longer arms and legs than a lot of people. It has to do with our canoe culture. And so anyways, he was holding up a bough of herring eggs up above him. And it was like looking at the Eiffel Tower or, something amazing. It was amazing, in my whole world, because it was good. It tasted good and it had good memories. And I just remember like full body excitement over these herring eggs that they had brought in. And other memories from childhood is deer, on the kitchen floor with the good cardboard out, processing it so we could jar it into venison and salmon. I love what you said, Nick, about being the Buffalo people. So we are the salmon people. And our life ways, our community structures, our seasonal migrations are associated with salmon runs and with an interconnectedness with the land, intending natural spaces to increase abundance. So it's very much part of our culture and our identity as Tlingit people that we are the caretakers of the land. And so that's, of course, a longer conversation, but that living in Southeast on Prince of Wales Island in small communities, fishing communities, we primarily had subsistence foods that we were well fed. We didn't know that we were poor, right? Because we didn't have other things to compare to. And thankfully at the time, we didn't have social media to show us all those other things. And so I didn't really realize that we were different in the way that we did things until I moved to Portland. My grandfather had land in Portland, and I have family that comes from, I'm also tall tan, so people from BC. I have family from Washington and Oregon, Southeast. So moving there, I started just eating things from the forest that looked good, and it was different plants. And so my grandfather recognized that he should probably teach me really fast what I could eat or not eat and how to use things. And as it turns out, his father was Ralph Ernest Weiser the First, who is considered the grandfather of Northwest Coast chiropractic and naturopathic medicine. So he taught me the body of knowledge that he got from his father. So it really comes from the family, right? And what the family gifted me with knowledge of food and medicine from that kind of whole and Northwest Coast environment. And from there, of course, through my teenage years, I didn't really want anything to do with it. But in my early 20s, I got really sick and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so I called Grandpa, and Grandpa lined me out. And, basically the Western American diet and lifestyle weren't good for me. It turns out I'm allergic to milk and wheat and soy and all those highly processed chemicals. I can't have any of them. They make me really sick. But that's part of our healer's journey, right? That we don't choose it, it chooses us. And if we're off course, we get redirected. We don't have to choose it, but life is so much better if you just surrender and accept it as a gift. So with that, my grandmother on my other side, I started talking to her about, the identity of being Native, and whether, I felt inadequate in ways. And she's so sweet. She's about 4'11", and she said, "Oh, honey, your grandparents fought their entire lives to be Native. It's your job to go out and just enjoy being Native." And she was referring to her grandparents who, fought in the courts in Alaska to get the civil right to vote in 1924, and worked on land claims. And then they actually did spend their entire lives so that we can have equal access and the rights to being Native. But she said their lament at the end of their life was that they gave up too much in the process of becoming civilized and assimilating into Western culture, to learn their ways so that we could gain legal access to our lands and waters and protect our spaces and our people and our families. They had to give up too much. And so that was the trajectory that really set me on my path, right? What does it mean to be Native? What does it mean to enjoy being Native? And what do we have to bring back into our lives and culture and communities to be healthy and whole again? And so if you start breaking it down into some of the simplest functions, our communities, our livelihoods were based on providing basic requirements for living, air, water, food, shelter, safety, and medicine. Like, that was a function of community. And so if we start looking at that framework, and we start looking at foods, here in Alaska as a group, we ship in 95% of our foods and goods. We only have about 3 to 5 days of food in the stores. It is actually our weakest point as a state, but it's also our greatest strength as Native people. So that gives, that point of contention, that's where we could make some magic. And so in my early 20s, I really started kind of going after this concept that was given to me by my grandparents of being, they told me that I was a traditional healer in the work that I was supposed to do. And then finding mentors and creating access was the challenge, and having to build a body of work. So that's where I met Valerie, was some of the work I did with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, starting the Alaska Plants as Food and Medicine Symposium, bringing together our knowledge holders and rebuilding knowledge systems. I travel all over Alaska, Canada, lower 48 even, to teach about plants and traditional medicines. And I've already talked a little bit too long, so I'm going to stop. And I don't want to talk about all of my accolades and accomplishments. It's out of protocol a little bit for me. So thank you.
Thank you. I just remember the first time meeting you at that gathering, and falling in love with so many things. Just, all the people that were convening to share and move the mark towards strengthening these systems, these healing systems, recovering them, revitalizing them, inspiring people by them. I fell in love with spruce and dandelion and fireweed and Meda and moose meat. It was so amazing. So there's so much to be grateful for in these, in this work. And something I'm constantly reminded of is just how long and hard our ancestors fought to just survive. And that now we have this opportunity. And I remember one of my elders, Hank Gobin, would say, this is our opportunity to shift into healing, into a system and a time of healing, and we can't miss it. And the best way, we can do that in our lifetime is to model for our children how to manage stress and how to fall deeply in love with your land and how to find yourself out there, because that's the medicine we all really need. And when we eat our foods, we're like activating all that stuff inside of us, all that ancestral memory. So it's beautiful work. I'm just so glad that both of you have reproduced. Like Nick, congratulations on a 4 and 7-year-old. that's a whole handful, especially this last year. It's a whole handful. I've got a 6 and 8-year-old myself. So and they're plant geeks, they love it. Like they're just obsessed with fishing and water and identifying plants and knowing what they're good for, because that is our human superpower, to be able to identify anything, really. It's how we get behind a wheel of a car and drive down the road. This is a steering wheel and this is what it's good for. And you can, shift your paradigm to think about the living world around you, and what those things are, what their names are, and what they're good for. And then and what they need from us to be able to, take care of it. So anyways, I want to save time for us all to get through the next question. And so Nick, I'm going to come back around to you. Considering the health impacts of unresolved trauma on our people, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and communally, can you describe how the process of revitalizing and strengthening our food traditions in turn revitalizes and strengthens our people?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's, these are questions that are like we've been battling, generationally, to not only revitalize our life ways, but revitalize ourselves, because food is the foundation of all living things. Water, air, and basic consumable food and stuff. And so it's really important that we revitalize our food systems. So when I'm talking about food systems, I'm talking about not only traditional but also modern food systems, because we live in a different time now, different from our grandparents and our great grandparents' time. Because I would sit with them and ask them stories, and it was over food. You talk about food through food, and that's how you opened up nostalgia, and that's what we're finding out more with my sister-in-law, Lisa Ironclad. She's a plant educator too, and what she found out is that in order to open up the elders, because she's looking for that that history and that education in order to open up that that nostalgia, the history, the lessons, the wisdoms from them. She makes them food, and they open right up, and it's the most the most exciting thing to see. Someone who battles with generational trauma, or went through trauma, being healed or being empowered through food. And so it makes you wonder that we don't emphasize food systems development across the board in any community, because when we look at our most indigenous cultures, food is one of those spiritual centers. It's one of those things that not only bring that circle together, but it's also one of those things that we always reference to. If we're talking about salmon, if we're talking about corn, if we're talking about buffalo, because we hold those things in high regards, because those things are generationally passed down, that food is the foundation of life. We talk about Mini Wachoni, water is life. We talk about Tatanka Oyate, the Buffalo Nation and stuff. And so um, and so to revitalize those things is to revitalize ourselves as a community. And we do those. We have to do those. We have to do those. In connection. We have to actually be on the ground. We have to be hands in the soil. We have to harvest our relatives. We have to have that. We have to have that connection that makes us. That makes us. Living organisms, to be able to share in that value of life. And so I mean, there's many stories that go on and on, but revitalizing and strengthening our food traditions, is something that is being revitalized. 10 years ago, I mean, gardening was so small, but also 10 years ago, traditional plant harvests were so small. Now we have this boom of younger generations who are empowered to learn about, native herbs and plants and fruits, and being able to have that eye to identify what those are, these certain trees, these herbs on the ground, when to harvest them, the relationship that you share with those, because you harvest them too early, you get a little sick, you harvest them too late, they're bitter, those kind of things, having those kind of connections. And so so when and those things are coming back, those things are being revitalized, and traditional foods is something that we have been disconnected from for, I can say, well over 2 generations, because at the time, in the 80s, we had this boom of groceries, stores, commodities, the boom of commercial products and stuff, and so our society has started to shift away from what was valued as normal traditional foods into what is valued as modern traditional foods. We have Indian tacos and whatnot and stuff, but we're coming back to a time where drying foods, we're planting foods, we're harvesting foods is becoming, the more relative, the more normal, but also revitalizing. And so to be able to do that is to be able to heal ourselves. And in indigenous countries, I mean, we're so plagued, we're so plagued by diseases that are all food related. And we know that because we know how it makes our bodies feel. But to understand what food can do, not only on a normal harvest level of looking, but also on the chemistry of how food makes you feel. And it's something that's very empowering, for me, because, we all battle with health related issues, but we know what triggers those health related issues, and it's what we consume. And so for here, like in my community, I mean, we have high salts, high fats, high sugars, all these things that are just convenience foods in our stores. But we need to revitalize our traditional foods, the buffaloes and the fish, and being able to share, on those roads that have been, those trails, those food trails that have been created and that have been revitalized today. So then that we can share in the many opportunities that come with, exchange of other cultures and exchange of other foods. But being able to go right outside, and I see my sister go outside and make an entire salad out of the greens that were just growing outside that other people identified as weeds and stuff. But it's amazing that once our younger generations get an idea of how do we connect with our older generations, it's been empowering, and across the board it's been through food. Even if we're talking about language, it always starts with food. In history, it starts with food. I mean, we have treaties because of food. We have massacres because of food. We have building of families or relationships because it all started with food. And so that's the most powerful thing in this world, is our connection to our food, because it's our connection to our lifeways, our land, and our families. So yep, that's what I got.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, food is such an just a natural organizing tool. You can pick it up and talk about it 1,000 different ways, which makes it really useful when you're trying to, help your people. Meda.
So I just want to say ditto to everything Nick said. I'm done. No, I jokes. So but authentically, like, to build off of that, because I agree with everything that you said, Nick, and it's beautiful and it resonates. So goodness, sheesh. So thinking about food through this healing lens, right? There's many levels to it. So we're talking about the connectivity to our ancestors and our culture, and to who we are, our identity, right? That connection to land. So that's the interface, right? That to the land and culture and people. And then if we start digging into, some of these other factors, when we look into the research, and we need more Indigenous research, and this is my call out to everybody, we need research done through an Indigenous lens, and not just academic, but hard science and data, because every time, I tell you what, they look into one of our foods, and lo and behold, it's a superfood, right? So, and not just the light food is medicine, it is actually medicine, right? So if you're going to build your framework, your body, your spirit, your mind, do you want the hollow building blocks, or do you want the best building blocks that you can get? And we have this kind of intrinsic wisdom of the earth, and what you need to survive well in certain environments is usually found in those environments, right? So like up here, we have the harsh cold. Well, the best antifreeze you can have in your body against harsh cold is those high grade marine oils, right? So it's going to give you what you need. The plants have to survive in this environment that challenges them. And so when you partake in eating those foods, it's a gift from those plants, it's a gift from those animals to give you what you need to survive in these spaces. It makes me think of a story from elders up in Northwest Territories that, like our low bush cranberries are medicine. And basically it's a panacea. So if you know what you have wrong with you, or you don't know what you have wrong with you, you always use low bush cranberries, right? As part of the medicine and feeding the body to, and helping that immune system. Well, after hearing that story a few years later, I have this document, and it says, it has all the berries lined out, and ANTHC, actually, I think Dr. Gary found that reference, but I was looking at it, and it says lingonberries are the highest on the antioxidant scale. Well, lingonberries is just the Northern European name for our low bush cranberries, right? So those antioxidants, breaking down free radicals, and it's exactly what our elders said. It will help you with any ailment or illness that you're dealing with. It'll help the body to deal, to heal through that and to get stronger. So there's that very functional aspect of, we have the best foods in the world for us right here, available to us, and how to process them. All foods come with rules, right? And some of those rules, which in the Western individualistic sense, like rules are a negative thing, but in a traditional sense, it's our protocols, how to be a good relative. This is what you do, right? And so in that protocol, we look at them as our relatives, and they have a personality. In ethnobotany, they call it a profile. So thankfully in ethnoherbalism, it's a personality, right? And you have to behave in a certain way so you don't offend your relative. And different plants have different personalities and different protocols. And so when you start engaging with the environment in that way, it actually becomes a protective measure. So the ACEs, if you don't know about ACEs, you should look up ACEs. It's adverse childhood effects. And they basically wanted to look at adult onset disease, chronic disease, behavioral issues, justice issues, and see if they can find a subset. And it was found kind of indirectly. We actually had a researcher from Kaiser Permanente, us as we in America, right? Looked into prevention because he was working with people who were overweight and wanting to find out, like how that preventative, how to get them to lose weight. And what he found at the core of it was most of the people who were overweight had suffered from a certain classification of experiences when they were children. So that led to the body of work with ACEs. And I'm not going to go too far into it, but basically, if you have so many of these events, then it increases the likelihood of certain outcomes. And the preventative side of that, though, is the most protective measure that they found was having at least one strong caregiver bond, one strong mentor when you were a child. And having that relationship was the most significant protective factor against adverse effects as an adult. Okay, so that's the main resiliency factor, is that connection. And so when you start thinking about it in a lens of the environment is a mother figure to us who nourishes us, and the plants and animals are relatives to us. If we impart that relationship to our children, that is a protective factor, that relationship, because the environment and the natural relatives or other nations become relationships, and they step into that protective factor as well. So, and teaching people who've gone through severe trauma that tending and caring for plants, it's a very honest relationship. And our trust bonds are usually created before the age of 3. And many of us have experienced adverse things, at young ages. And so it's really hard to rebuild those. It can be done, but it's challenging to rebuild those trust bond relationships. But you can start it with plants, because plants will be honest. If you don't water them, they will wilt, right? If you're not tending them, it will reflect back to you. And that reflection back to you of what you are doing, that used to be a function in our communities with our nonverbal communications and expressions of compassion. So because we didn't have mirrors, we didn't look at ourselves, we looked at each other. So we saw each other through the other person's eyes. And that was our mirror, right? So when we're working with plants, it recreates that traditional social emotional connectivity. So, Ganesh Chish.
I love it. I mean, it's so amazing when science is brilliant and it can create these beautiful connections, like being able to articulate it in a way that conveys the teaching to a broader public to better understand what we mean when we say that, our foods are our relatives, they're more than just resources and commodities to be extracted from the land. They're our relatives. When the Food Sovereignty Project in my community got to a point where, we'd felt that we'd done enough with food resourcing and wanted to really focus on curriculum development, we moved to working with the tribal school, and it's a K-12 tribal school, and built out these interdisciplinary thematic food units, which is like a really nerdy way to say, like, try to not teach about a plant or try to not teach about a food and connect it to all subjects. Like that was my opening line at these teacher trainings is, my challenge to you is to not do it, because it's so simple to connect it to science, math, engineering, literacy, all of it. But one of the elders who was advising, reviewing the curriculum would say, our children, the first form of literacy was learning to read the land and learning to read the waters. And now we're teaching them how to read books. And so we can do both. And that means just taking kids outside, but not just taking them outside, also going deeper into this relationship that helps build emotional stamina in our children so that they feel that connection with the land and understand that the land will always know who you are, and the water will always know who you are and where you come from. So, and since then we've seen our graduation rates actually in the high school have increased from 64%. We're going to be in the 90s next year. We're on track. So we know that this is working, that kids, appreciate, those students really appreciate the like real life connection and the cultural connection that everything is derived out of, just grounding them in that place. And then, inspiring them to, well, my hidden strategy is to raise a generation of natural resource managers that have that kind of lens on them, and really truly understand what it means. But it's our, I think for thousands of years, we have built up this genetic coding, to organize ourselves around our food systems. And so when people ask me why I do what I do, I think, what else would I do? Like, it's what I'm bred to do. It's what I'm put here to do. And I think it's why it's so engaging to our communities too, because we feel so familiar working in this space. It's just something we've been doing for so long. And after thousands of years of perfecting these recipes and techniques and that, like you're saying, Meda, the intrinsic wisdom of the earth, perfecting that and handing it down through our generations, we have a choice in our life to pick it up and carry it on and continue passing that on, or doing something else, I guess. I don't know what else that would be. So I was gonna open it up to we have about 15 minutes left. And I think it's a good time to see if there are any questions from our participants, and or if Nick or Meda, if there's anything else that you just really feel like you won't be able to sleep tonight if you don't say it. That happens to me. You should say it. But
No, I just wanted to. I just wanted to add. Based on what Meda was talking about, and seeing yourself. I really, her statement about we didn't have mirrors, and so we've seen ourselves in each other, and then we've seen ourselves in the plants and everything. That's true, because we're still disconnected. As a people of this earth, we're so disconnected with the Western way of living that we forget to see ourselves, in our environment. And that's the one thing my boys really stress on, because they live in the Western set of technology. But whenever we're traveling, there's, for younger generations, there's such a sponge that you take them one place, it's something new to them. It's something that they absorb and something that they remember. And when you pass by it, they'll be like, hey, I remember that. And I remember doing this and that and this and that. And it's so powerful, because we as older generations, in some form or fashion, have trauma that's blocking out, our relationship to the environment and stuff. But to see it in my boys, every time that we pass by, a certain piece of land or a certain piece of water, it sparks, that connection for them even more, and they highlight it on a lot of the positive things that they had a chance to engage in. And so when we talk about food and food systems, it's being able to open up our own eyes to our own community, because a lot of our relatives who live in our homelands never get the chance to travel, in their own backyards. Never get a chance to travel like a certain piece of land that other people have seen. or never even looked at their own backyard for picking an entire salad, those kind of things. And that's when we talk about food systems, we're not talking about building entire constructs of systems. We're talking about just being able to take, one blade of grass or one dandelion or whatnot, and being able to have that connection and being able to raise that emotional height, that sense, that taste, that smell, that is valued more in our younger generations. So being able to share in that time, and that statement that Meda just said, I mean, it's you like I said, we can keep adding to story after story after story based on one true statement that we need to get back to reconnecting with our land.
Goodness, sheesh. And to tie that in, we have a question from Carmen for local cities and states. How can people advocate for Indigenous foodways to be a topic that is budgeted for and preserved? So this is a great question, right? And it goes into being how to be good allies. So we have 566 tribes, federally recognized tribes in the United States. And we also have unrecognized tribes as well. And so this is a great time to then advocate based on communication with the tribes. So, it's going to be different in every place that you're at. There's some groups that need more access to water. There's some groups who need more access to affordable electricity. There's some groups who need more access to traditional fishing grounds or harvesting grounds, right? So every single tribe is going to have a different set of needs. And so this is when it's important to honor that sovereignty and self-governance, and then go into consultation with them and ask authentically, how can you be, how can we be good relatives with you and the tribes? And, the Tlingit people in Southeast, we love adopting people, especially, well, mostly good people who do good work, right? We're like, oh, well, if you're going to be a real person, then we're going to adopt you. You're honorary Tlingit, right? And that's what Tlingit means, the people of this land, Dene or Inupiaq or Unungan, right? Yupik, it's the people of the land. And most of our names actually mean that. And so that understanding of what does it mean to be the people of the land isn't in the Western context of ownership. It's not, we own this land. It's we are the person function in this land, right? And so what is that person function? We are a cornerstone species, a builder species, right? We're a caretaker species. We're like beaver. I think beaver is actually a little bit more industrious, though. They're just smaller. But that's what that means, is we're the caretakers or the guardians, right? We're the real human beings in this area. So when you start engaging with the local tribal people, whatever they're going to do to increase food sovereignty and self-sufficiency, it's going to translate to all the populations around them, right? So what's good for the Native people is going to be good for all of the people in that area. And part of that is because at our core of who we are as people is to share and to care, right? So I'm mixed. My children are mixed. In Alaska, we don't have reservations. We actually have a different model. Our communities are mixed. And we, show this in our health corporations. We took over our health corporations. And a lot of times in our small communities, the Native Health Corporation or clinic is the only one that the entire community serves the entire community. And that's going to be the same thing with foods, out here in Knik in the Valley, when they do their food sustainability and distributions, they distribute it to anybody who's in need and helping. Because traditionally, if we are doing well and our relatives and neighbors are suffering, then it is actually adverse in our status. So if we are doing well and we are caring for our neighbors and our family and increasing their health and wellness, that it increases our level of well-being in reciprocity. So, goodness, sheesh.
Thank you. I agree. I also think this question is really critical to this land acknowledgement movement that I'm seeing happening everywhere. Universities, city governments, schools are all incorporating land acknowledgements. But when you can prioritize budgeting and making sure that there's a space for this conversation to happen, we start actualizing land acknowledgements. And I think that is probably going to be more powerful than making a statement about it and then moving on. It enacts and tells the story of the land. And, I'm working on a couple projects right now with the city of Seattle where they're really, have prioritized it and are holding really good conversation around it. And it's not just healing for telling the story of the city, but also folks like myself whose village site is, located in Seattle, and now Pioneer Square, which is where my ancestral longhouse was, is now getting, being a part of a narrative, the whole, not just the industrial change that happened there, but the Flounder Lagoon, that was the famous spot to fish in. So anyways, how do we actualize land acknowledgements? And I think that question scratches at it. And thank you, Meda, for your response. We do have one more question and a little bit more time to go. So let's try to squeeze it in here. What's the single biggest blocker you've run into in moving from what we have now to your vision for a healthy, healing food system?
What is the biggest blocker we've run into? I would probably say, one of the biggest blocker moving towards creating and revitalizing a healthy, healing food system is access to land. Within my community, one of the, I think we're like top 5 largest land-based reservations. But we have a lot of Western policies and Western systems that block our access to land. And so when we talk about land back movements, we talk about changing policies that help to get us on the land to basically live our lives, to basically reconnect back to our communities, back to our environment and stuff. And so Western policies that we have to throw out, that we have to take and develop our own systems, reconnect and revitalize our systems. We have generational systems that we had for thousands of years, societal systems, food systems, and so we're not creating anything new. We're basically reconnecting back to who we are as people, as relatives, as stewards of the land. And that means, getting our hands, getting our feet, and getting ourselves back, reconnected back to the land. And so when we talk about creating healthy, healing food systems, it's basically getting back on the land and working, in connection with it, as stewards, we're talking small stewards. We're the microorganisms basically in this entire ecosystem. And so we should be learning from the land in itself and from the animals and everything, how to take care of it, because it's lived for millennia. And so but it comes back to making a healthy, healing food system is basically getting back on the land and reconnecting back with the ecosystems that we've taken for granted. As a people across the board. So that's kind of my input on that.
And I would just agree with everything that you said, Nick. Here in Alaska, we have almost 60% of the land is federally owned. And then we have state-owned land, we have corporation-owned land, we have tribal-owned land, we have privately owned land. And then we have municipal and borough-owned lands. And then from there, we also have laws and policies that have international, national, state, tribal, corporate levels that we have to navigate. And so within that context, we have to just speak plainly. In ANCSA, they took away our Aboriginal title, and that needs to be reinstated. We have to have our Aboriginal title back. And even if we don't get this federal lands in fee simple, we still should have a compact agreement that we have access to those lands, that we can then tend and augment natural systems to increase abundance, so that we have access to traditional foods and activities again, in a similar way to the way that we used to. And because we have, nation to nation agreements with the federal government, this is not a far reach. This is something that can be done within the systems that we have to kind of break those barriers and move forward. Yeah. 2 minutes, it's yours, Valerie.
Oh my goodness. Well, I want to thank you both for just your beautiful, deep insights and all the work that you carry in your community. And I just really love, holding space like this for all of us, because we're so far away from each other these days. And it's good to know that you're not alone out there. I'm wondering if, Debbie, if you had any final statements or words that you needed to share before we run out of time. But I did just want to say thank you so much for making this happen, and also for the panelists who tuned in, and I hope that we all have a good day and stay cool out there. I'm gonna go try to lay in the river again so I don't evaporate.
Yes, I hope everyone is hydrating and staying cool and taking care of yourselves and taking care of each other. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining in this wonderful panel. This was such a rich discussion. I felt so lucky to be able to listen to it. A very warm thank you, especially, of course, to Valerie and to Meda and to Nick, to the First Nations Development Institute, and of course to our guests who joined us today. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please go check out all of our panelists today on their social handles and in their respective projects. And you can go to jamesbeard.org to see other virtual events that we may have coming up. To donate to our ongoing fund for Black and Indigenous American business owners, you can visit jamesbeard.org/investment-funds. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Good job. Mama.
Thank you.
So it would go down easy as